The complete history of Israel's occupation of Palestine. The long history of Israeli occupation and Palestinian resistance spans 3 centuries. Here are the key events that shaped this long struggle. 19th century. On August 29, 1897, Theodor Herzl led the First Zionist Congress. They agreed on steps to establish a Jewish state in Palestine, then controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Strong funding from Jewish bankers in Europe supported this movement. With this funding, Jewish immigrants began arriving in Palestine and purchasing land from Arabs who had lived there for centuries. In 1897, an Arab commission was also established in Jerusalem to stop land grabs by Jewish immigrants. At that time, Jewish landowners began evicting Arab residents. Arabs became suspicious of the plan to establish an Israeli state. At the turn of the millennium, with the increasing number of Jewish immigrants, a sense of nationalism also emerged among the native Arab population. They also dreamed of their own state in Palestine and were fed up with the increasingly oppressive Jewish landlords. In 1915, amidst World War I, Britain successfully persuaded the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein ibn Ali, to launch a rebellion against the Ottoman Empire with promises of support for the establishment of an Arab state encompassing most of the Middle East, including Palestine. On November 2, 1917, through the lobby of Jewish banker Walter Rothschild, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour announced British support for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. This declaration was seen by the Sharif of Mecca and the Arab nation as a whole as a betrayal of Britain's previous promises. The Balfour Declaration also further encouraged massive Jewish immigration to Palestine. The Jewish population surged dramatically from then on, from 5% to 30% in 1935. In 1918, Britain, as the victor of World War I, occupied Palestine under mandatory status. From then on, pro-Jewish policies were implemented. Jewish workers were paid more, and the Zionist flag was allowed to fly, while the Arab flag was prohibited. Feeling the wind in their sails, Zionist activists and media began campaigning for the complete expulsion of Arabs from Palestine in 1919. Shortly after 1920, clashes began to break out between Arabs and the increasingly massive influx of Jewish immigrants. These clashes culminated in the mid to late 1930s, when 2 Palestinian clerics, Izz al-Din al-Qassam and Amin al-Husseini, launched a mass strike. The British brutally suppressed the uprising, resulting in approximately 19,000 Arab deaths. Following the violence of the 1930s, Britain softened. In 1939, it enacted a policy of restricting Jewish immigration and rejecting the establishment of a state exclusively for Jews. The establishment of a new state also required the consent of Palestinian Arabs. The wave of violence in the 1930s also sparked the formation of Jewish terrorist militias, such as the Haganah and the Irgun. They frequently terrorized Arab villages in Palestine, often accompanied by murder and persecution. The genocide perpetrated by Nazi Germany in Europe against Jews before and during World War II also triggered a mass migration of Jews to Palestine. After World War II, the genocide in Germany gave Jewish settlers in Palestine the impetus to establish a Zionist state. On November 29, 1947, the UN issued Resolution 181-2, which divided Palestine into 2 states. The Arab community rejected this solution as unfair. Jews, who constituted 33% of the population and legally owned only 7% of the land in Palestine, were given a state territory covering 56% of the Palestine Mandate. Meanwhile, Arabs, who comprised 67% of the population and legally owned at least 80% of the land in Palestine, received a smaller territory, only 43%. In 1948, a wave of violence erupted in Palestine. Arabs, who considered the UN resolution unfair, frequently protested, while Jewish terrorist forces committed atrocities in various Palestinian villages. One striking example occurred in Deir Yassin near Jerusalem in April 1948. Hundreds of villagers were massacred by the Irgun and another Jewish terrorist group, the Lehu. On March 10, 1948, Zionist leaders, at the suggestion of David Ben-Gurion, agreed to the Daleth Plan. This plan was a planned action to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. A month later, Israel declared its independence, as Britain officially relinquished its mandate in Palestine. Israel's proclamation sparked a response from Arab countries and volunteer fighters in Palestine. However, the Israeli army, which had already reached 50,000 personnel, equipped with the most advanced weapons of the time, purchased from the Soviet Union, easily defeated the smaller and minimally armed Arab forces. Israel succeeded in taking control of most of Palestine. Meanwhile, Jordan annexed the West Bank and Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip. Following the Arab-Israeli War, the Zionist state began a campaign of ethnic cleansing, expelling approximately 800,000 Palestinian Arabs from their homes. This event is known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, in Palestine. Hundreds of thousands of refugees then spread across Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and other countries. Palestine declared independence on September 22, 1948, and with the help of Egypt and Jordan, launched attacks on the border with Israel in the 1950s. In 1964, Yasser Arafat founded the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) in exile. The movement gained legitimacy among Arab states, who saw it as the primary Palestinian resistance organization. Israel launched a surprise attack on Egyptian territory in 1967 under the pretext of securing its sea routes. This attack sparked the Six-Day War between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Israel, armed with Western weapons, won the battle and took control of Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Sinai Peninsula. Around 600,000 Arabs were expelled from Gaza and the West Bank, a second catastrophe that became known as the Nakba. Believing they could not defeat Israel through open warfare, Palestinian resistance fighters employed guerrilla tactics to fight for independence. Throughout the 1970s, hijackings, suicide bombings, and hostage-taking began to be carried out by fighters from the PLO and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, led by Palestinian Christian George Habash. Palestinian resistance also took place through Lebanon throughout the 1970s and 1980s. This coincided with the Lebanese Civil War. Israel then invaded Lebanon in 1982 to end the PLO's resistance in Lebanon. In 1982, Israel facilitated and condoned the massacre of 3,500 Palestinian refugees in the Sabra Shatila refugee camp. By late 1987, Palestinians in the Israeli-occupied territories were seething with discrimination, arrests, restrictions on worship, and murder. In December 1987, an Israeli army truck ran over several Palestinians, sparking massive protests. The protests later became a nationwide Palestinian uprising known as the Intifada. During this period, the group that would later play a major role in the uprising, Hamas, was formed. A total of 1,962 Palestinians were killed and 200 Israelis were killed. Encouraged by the Intifada's resistance, the Israeli government under Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin agreed to peace talks with Yasser Arafat, brokered by the US in 1993. In 1995, both sides agreed on the existence of a Palestinian entity that would govern the West Bank and Gaza. Although still detrimental to the Palestinians, this agreement ended the Intifada. Meanwhile, in Israel, Yitzhak Rabin was executed by a right-wing Jewish terrorist as a result of this agreement. 21st century. Despite Yitzhak Rabin's assassination, peace negotiations continued. However, in September 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon made a provocative visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This sparked a second intifada that was even deadlier than the first. Approximately 3,000 Palestinians and 1,000 Israelis died. The second intifada officially ended in 2005 when both sides agreed to cease hostilities. In 2006, Palestinian elections were held with the goal of establishing a Palestinian state. Hamas won a majority of the vote, with 44% of the vote. Israel and the US refused to recognize the election results due to Hamas's continued rejection of Israel's existence. Meanwhile, in 2007, Hamas and Fatah engaged in internal conflict, resulting in Hamas taking control of Gaza and the Palestinian Authority taking control of the West Bank. In late 2008, Israeli forces attacked several police posts and tunnels in Gaza. Hamas, viewing the attacks as a violation of the ceasefire, retaliated with rocket fire. This escalated into open conflict when Israel launched Operation Cast Lead in Gaza, resulting in thousands of civilian casualties. In February 2009, a ceasefire was signed with international mediation between the two sides. In 2012, another ceasefire was signed by Hamas and Israel. The agreement stipulated that both sides would refrain from attacking each other. The agreement also required the lifting of the Israeli blockade of Gaza. Gaza's goods and residents may no longer be blocked from entering or leaving the territory. This last point of the agreement was repeatedly violated by Israel, leading to the outbreak of war in 2014. Israel's bombardment of Gaza at that time killed 2,300 Gazans, 70% of whom were civilians. In May 2021, Israel forcibly evicted Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah, near the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This sparked protests and then a siege of worshippers observing itikaf restrictions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hamas rockets and Israeli retaliation against Gaza followed the incident. This escalation was crucial because, for the first time, sentiment in support of Palestine became commonplace across the world. In November 2022, Benjamin Netanyahu was re-elected as prime minister and formed a cabinet and coalition with right-wing Israeli groups. This coalition government continued to expand illegal refugee camps in the West Bank, encourage settler militancy, carry out provocations at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and regularly conduct raids in the West Bank that have killed hundreds of Palestinians. Meanwhile, the number of Palestinians detained without trial also continued to soar, reaching 5,000 in early 2023. Various parties warned that these Israeli actions would trigger war, but Israel ignored them. On October 7, 2023, under the pretext of stopping Israeli actions, thousands of Hamas fighters breached the Israeli border in Operation Al-Aqsa Storm. They attacked Israeli military posts and settlements. Israel claimed 1,400 civilians were killed in the attack, along with hundreds of Israeli soldiers. Hundreds were also taken prisoner by Hamas after the attack. Israel then launched the most brutal bombardment in history on Gaza. This bombardment met elements of war crimes and genocide, indiscriminately destroying civilian buildings and cutting off electricity, clean water, food, fuel, and telecommunications. At least 41,500 Gazans, the majority of whom were children, were martyred in the attack.